But yeah, I was really excited to do this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not every day we get a big male porn star.
Yeah, something like that.
How'd you get into this line of work?
One, I was super hypersexual growing up, so I've always been hypersexual, and I believe that, you know, people who grow up hypersexual probably have some type of form of abuse, and if you do anything as a kid, you're good at it. You know, like if you played baseball as a kid, when you get older, you're still pretty good at baseball, you know? So, you know, even like MMA fighters and stuff like that, when they grew up, like a lot of MMA fighters grew up fighting with their brothers and stuff as young kids, and they get older and they start to do, you know, MMA. For me, I was just always hypersexual, and I'm in recovery. I've been clean a long time. And when I got clean, I couldn't drink. Or I didn't drink. I didn't go to clubs and bars or anything like that. So I found myself, you know, experimenting with like swingers clubs and stuff like that. And I got introduced like the whole life. And then it kind of changed my whole perspective on monogamy, you know. And then when I was 21, 22, I had a friend who owned a male escort agency, and he hired me. And I started to become a male escort, and I did that for a few years off and on.
Tell me about that.
And I was like part-time.
Is that so? Your clients as a male escort are who?
So one, I was clean like 5 years before I did it, and I was very against it because to me it was like anti-recovery. It wasn't spiritual, you know, technically illegal, you know. So I was very like conflicted on whether or not I wanted to do this. I judged other people who did it, you know. And I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I was single at a time, and I had a friend who was like the top male escort there. And he was clean a long time, and the guy who owned it was clean a long time. And I had a lot of respect for these men, you know, men who helped tons of people. And I looked up to, I was just like, man, I don't know how they do that and stay clean. And one day my friend called me and was like, hey, I need you to cock stunt for me in Miami. And I was like, what, dude? I'm not screwing some old lady. And he was like, who says she's old? And I was like, well, that's who you would think is hiring male escorts. And my first job ever was a sugar daddy who had sugar babies, who was really well off. And he had like a rotation of them. And he would have an apartment for each girl. And each apartment would have like their pictures and portraits all over the apartment, you know? And you would and I went to the apartment, and he was there. And, you know, it was my first time. I was super nervous. And he offered me Viagra, and I was like, you know, I'm in recovery, so I don't take any pills, I don't drink, you know, I like totally refused. And then he was like, have a seat and read this book. And on the table was a book called The House Rules, or Welcome to the Playhouse, These Are the House Rules. And it was like a list of do's and don'ts of how to treat the girl. You know, don't slap her, don't call her a bitch, she's a princess. And then he went on to tell me how beautiful she was and how amazing she is and how special this is for them. And she was blindfolded in lingerie on the bed with the door open to the bedroom. And he never even went inside the bedroom. He would just walk back and forth the doorway to make sure that she's okay. Like his biggest thing was to make sure that she was getting treated like a princess. And I went in there, and I just like slowly missionary for like 10 minutes, and she was like going crazy. And I thought she was faking it, because I'm like, I'm not even doing anything. But she was all giddy and nervous, and because she's blindfolded the entire time. So she was like, who's there? And I wouldn't say anything. And he was just looking at me like thumbs up, you know? And I went in, I did my thing, and probably 15 minutes. And when I left, he handed me an envelope of $3,000. And that was the first time I ever, and it didn't feel unspiritual. It didn't feel wrong. And I've done things like, you know, I was on drugs my whole childhood. So I've done things that are immoral and things that felt wrong. I didn't, like, no one got taken advantage. It was very clean, you know? And I was like, wow, that wasn't really that bad. And then I would kind of do that like 3 times a week. And then like once a month, we would have a party where it would be like 7 male escorts and 1 girl. And we would just kind of like take turns. And sometimes it was recorded and sometimes it wasn't. And I would just do that kind of like for side money in my early 20s. So that's basically how it would go.
It's a hell of a way for a young man to make money. My dad was giving me a hard time about not watching the news enough, so naturally I gave him a hard time right back. I told him most of what we're shown is designed to alarm us, not inform us. And that's why I asked Ground News to sponsor my channel. Ground News is an app and website that helps you form your own opinions by showing you every article published on any story worldwide. My favorite part is how it breaks down each news source's political bias, reliability, and even ownership, so you can actually see where your information is coming from. Let me show you how it works. Here's a story about the Palisades fires in Los Angeles. Ground News shows that 13 outlets covered it, most leaning slightly right. You can instantly see who owns these outlets, how reliable they are, and how differently they frame the same event. Some headlines focus on firefighter decisions, others on weather and risk. Same story told through two very different lenses. I also like their blind spot feed. It highlights stories that are covered heavily by one side but ignored by the other. It's a simple way to step outside your own echo chamber. So if you're tired of being told what to think, check them out at ground.news/SWU. You'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, and by subscribing or even gifting it to someone, you're supporting independent thinking and this channel directly. Again, that's ground.news/SWU. Thank you for watching.
Basically how it would go.
It's a hell of a way for a young man to make money.
Yeah, at the time I was also in the motorcycle business and I was making decent money, and like, you know, from somebody who, you know, I was smoking crack when I was 14 and I never really cared about, my first 5 years clean, I didn't care about money. My first 5 years clean, I was very like, I need to avoid money because I wanted to focus on staying clean. I knew that if I had money at a young age or a young recovery, that it would divert me from my primary purpose, which is to stay clean. So I was very against fast money or anything like that. But around 5 years, I started to get interested in business and things like that. And me and my friend started, well, he already had a motorcycle company. He had hired me, and then I kind of had like a joint venture with him. And we grew that company to the largest motorcycle parts company on eBay. And we sold it for like a couple million eventually. But when I was like 22, 21, I was making six figures and I was escorting on the side and living a life that was, to me, like, I couldn't even imagine.
So I'll ask this question again. As a male escort, who are the majority of your clients? Like
it's different. So I would cherry pick the easiest jobs.
Well, that sugar daddy situation was pretty unique.
Yeah, that situation was unique, but I would, you know, I wasn't good at it. You know, I had friends who they were sleeping with 70-year-old women every day, you know, or 60-year-old women, you know, every day, or not 500 pound, but maybe 300-pound women all the time. I was never doing that. You know, I was very, hey, you know, if the girl's pretty and attractive and like no one's like.
Is that the reality of being a male escort? Is you're getting women that are?
I would probably say like 50% of it is. There are attractive women and there are women who have a lot of money who get off on the experience. Women are very different from men, where a guy will hire an escort for an hour usually, and maybe like a weekend or something like that. But like women in my line of work were very into getting to know you, and they want to go to dinner with you, and they wanted to take you out to show them in front of your friends. You know, a lot of them would want you to go to some event with them. And sometimes it would be like sugar daddies hiring men for their wives or their girlfriends or their sugar babies, or it would be a super successful woman who's just was like, this is great. I wonder what it would be like to be the one in control, and he could do whatever I want, and he's attractive and he's a professional, and I'm so busy. I don't want anything super serious, and they're tired of up and down relationships and the emotions, and they kind of want something transactional, and it's clean and it's fun and it's playful, and they can also focus on their business. Or it would be like a husband who wants to hire. A lot of times it would be like a husband who their wife lets them cheat like crazy. Hey, you could do whatever you want as long as you come home. And every once in a while, they would hire an escort for the wife, so that way they would feel like, hey, I'm in control of the guy. They don't have their phone number. It's through an agency, and she gets to sleep with this one guy every once in a while, and she gets her little thing, and I get to do my thing. So a lot of times it was something like that. Sometimes it would be swingers. And then, of course, you have people like the P. Diddy thing, where he would hire male escorts to sleep with his wife, and he was like a cuck. And I don't know if he participated, but I have friends who were all involved in that. And they mainly said that he would kind of just watch.
Yeah, I did a talk with a guy recently who kind of said he just watched.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was told. But I never was told that there was anything homosexual happening with the guys, even though I'm sure it did happen. But like none of my friends would ever tell me that. So.
And were some of your sexual experiences, like when you were on drugs or in the escort thing, with men?
No, never.
Never.
I've always been like very straight in that sense, you know. Even when I was using, there wasn't any sex involved at all, you know. But no, I was never, you know, playing for both teams per se, you know.
And then eventually you got into porn?
Yeah, so then when we sold that company, my dream was to own a drug and alcohol rehab. And at the time that I was escorting, I kind of saw it as like side money. I never really saw it as like a career. It was just kind of like fun and easy money. And I started a drug and alcohol rehab when I was 25. And I got 2 people to invest like $1.7 million. And I did that for years and started making, you know, really good money. And I was the CEO of the company. And I had, you know, probably 100 employees at the time, multiple locations. And, you know, for me, like I was respected in the community. Even though I was young, I was only 25. People in the recovery community had known me since I was 17. So when they came to work for me, even though I was 25, they knew, hey, this is a good guy. He's going to be professional, because there was a lot of fraud going on in Florida with drug and alcohol rehab. So a lot of people were wary to work for someone, especially someone who was young. So a lot of young kids were doing fraud. And I think I had owned the company for about 5 years. And one of my closest friends, his stage name is Alex Adams. He's the #1 male adult performer in the world. Not subjectively, like this is a fact. He has the most views and he probably makes the most money. And when I met him, he had a couple months clean and we were going to meetings together. And this guy was like driving a shitty car from the gutter, you know, and I remember we went out to eat with him, he told us that he did porn. And prior to OnlyFans, like nobody was doing porn, you know, like especially if you were a guy, you know, like it just wasn't a common. And I remember us going out to eat, we're like, what do you do for work? And he's like, oh, I do porn. And we were like, what? And people in recovery were probably trying to convince him to stop or whatever, but he never really had an issue with it. And he stayed clean and he's still clean today. And I'm a big car guy, and me and him would talk about cars a lot. And probably 3, 4 years, 5 years into his recovery, he started buying, you know, Rolls Royces, McLarens, Ferraris, and he moved into a nice house, and he was #1 on all platforms for views, and he was killing it. And he was doing a style that not a lot of people were doing. It was very amateur, very POV. He wouldn't show his face. It would be really hyper real. And one day I was like, dude, how does it work? And he was like, come over to my house and I'll show you. And he showed me how to do like a compliance paperwork, how to do an intro interview and an exit interview. He introduced me to his agent. And I was like, let me just upload a couple videos and see what happens. Now at the time, I'm like maybe 8, 9, maybe 10 years clean. You know, I'm 27 years old. And I don't think this is gonna be a career, but I was like, let me just not show my face and see what happens.
So where were you posting?
Pornhub. So I was posting on Pornhub and X videos at the time. OnlyFans didn't exist. And I posted like 6 videos and they all flopped. And I was like, whoa, this is harder than it looks. And I started to really study videos and I was like, what am I doing wrong? So I was like, there's no dialogue. So like, let me do a video with like a fucking plot, right? So I did this video with Alexa Vega and I pick her up at a gas station. And at the time I'm in my G-Wagon and I pick her up at the gas station and I was like, hey, you know, what are you doing? Need a ride? She's like, no, I'm good. And I was like, you know, what do you do for work? She's like, oh, I clean houses. And I was like, oh, what if I pay you to clean my house? And she's like, okay. And I get her in the car and I'm kind of flirting with her. And then I take her to my house and I get her to clean my clothes. And then we end up doing a video. And that video was the #1 most viewed video in December of 2018.
So the scenario you just laid out with her, that was the scene that you were shooting?
That was the scene, yes. She was a professional adult.
She knew what was going on.
Yeah. We did paperwork. She was through an agency. She was a professional. Yeah. That was just the scenario for the video.
Right.
And I uploaded the video and it got like 27 million views in 1 month. Now, Pornhub at the time was paying like $900 per view, so that was $27,000 on one video. So I was like, holy shit. So I started uploading.
They were paying what?
$1,000 per million view.
Per million view.
Which is like a quarter of YouTube at the time, you know? Yeah. But it was still decent money and there wasn't a lot of competition. That's the main thing. It's like now there's so much competition. It's really hard now. But back then, I wish I would have, you know, whatever. You live and you learn. So I had made $27,000 off this one video. And I was like, oh my God. And I did another one with the girl at the beach with Brandy Bay. And she was at the beach and I was like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, oh, can you help put lotion on me? And I was like, sure. And it got millions of views as well. So now I'm like, yes, now I have a side hustle.
And you're showing your face or not?
No, just POV, not showing my face. You know,
the girls,
and at
the girls are showing their faces.
Yeah, of course. It's POV. I'm just holding the camera the whole time. So
are there women making money like this as well?
No. So in adult entertainment, you would pay an actress their fee, which could be $1,000 to $1,500, and then they don't get residuals. It's not collaborative. It's
and if
just,
it flops, they still get paid.
If it flops, they still get paid.
Yeah.
And that's entertainment. You know, if someone does their first movie and the company loses $10 million, they're not going to say, hey, let's split the debt too, you know? Yeah. So, you know, that's basically what it is. And they get guaranteed money. And if they really wanted to, they could just do their own video and put it up. And because a lot of women in the adult industry say, oh, they made all this money off me. All right, well, why don't you just do it and you make the money? You know, it doesn't really work that way. Yeah. It would be like you doing a video on somebody and then saying like, oh, well, this guy made all this money off me. And it's like, all right, well, he had a whole platform and a following and whatever. So I started to make money off it and I started to put a little more videos out. And one day my friend hit me up and he sent me the video and he was like, bro, what the fuck are you doing? And I was clean like 10 years at the time, or 10 years at the time probably. And this guy had like 16 years clean, close friend of mine, you know, good, solid man. And he was like, hey bro, what the fuck are you doing? And I was like, what? And he goes, this is you. And I go, how do you know? And he goes, cause that's your car, that's Griffin, that's Davey where you live, and that's your voice. And I was like, you recognize my voice? And he was like, yeah, bro, I recognize your voice. So he had moved to Asheville. So I'm like, oh, you live in Asheville. That's why you can see it, because I blocked Florida. On Pornhub, you could block states. And he was like, no, bro, I'm in Florida. And I was like, how can you see it? I thought and for some reason, I guess the blocking doesn't really work. And I was like, he's just a crazy porn guy. No one else is going to really notice this. So I had told him like, hey, look, I'm doing this as a side hustle, whatever. And he's like, hey, I'm just worried about you. I'm not judging you, but you have a lot going for you. And your treatment center is doing well. You're very respected in the recovery community. He's like, be careful. And I was like, all right. And then someone else sent it to me. And then someone else sent it to me. And all these people were saying they could recognize my voice. And I was like, dude, people could recognize my voice? And they're like, yeah, and we could kind of tell that it's your body. And I would be like, damn, really? And then the breaking point for me was an alumni client was texting me once. And this kid had been in and out of the drug rehab multiple times, knucklehead, young kid, not that much younger than me. And I was like, bro, you need to take your recovery seriously. Everything's always a fucking game too. Like, you need to work steps. You got to get a sponsor. You got to do service. And he goes, yeah, how's your fucking porn career? And I was like, how do you know? And he wouldn't respond. And I was like, bro, how do you know? And he was like, nothing, don't worry about it. And I called him and he was like, someone sent it to me. And I was like, damn, who sent it to you? And he was like, one of your employees. So I'm like, oh my God, dude, I have business partners, I have employees, and like a lot of people in recovery are Christian. And I had a big conflict on like, am I self-sabotaging my life? Like, why am I doing this risky behavior? And, is this an addiction, And he was like, dude, I'm not judging you. I was just joking, But it started to get to a point where I was like, I need to make a decision. I'm either going to work in treatment or do this adult entertainment stuff. And honestly, because I had business partners, I felt obligated to continue to work in treatment, But I did really want to do the adult entertainment stuff. So I talked to my sponsor about it. I talked to my close friends about it. So I would continue to make videos, but not post them. And I'm a collector. I have like 5,000 Pokemon cards. I have 70 guns. I have a bunch of comic books. I have a bunch of baseball cards. Like, I like to collect things, you know? So in my mind, I was like, this is kind of like collecting baseball cards that I could sell in the future. So I'm going to keep making videos and I'll just put them on a hard drive. And it's kind of like an investment. And I started to do that. And I kept thinking, when I sell my company, I'm going to go public with doing the adult entertainment stuff. And I kept thinking, like, I'll sell in like 2 years. And 2 years would come around, I'd be like, well, we're gonna sell next year. And then we had 2 of the worst years financially ever. And we were nowhere near selling. And I was like, damn, so now I'm not gonna be able to like live my dream, you know? But I had like 300 videos on a hard drive at this time, you know? And
not releasing them?
Not releasing them, just putting them on a hard drive, you know? And I had took a personality test. My friend is super successful. Like, dude, he has an incredible story. He got clean at 19, was dead broke up until he had 16 years clean. He probably makes $10 million a year now. And one of my mentors, in not just business, but in recovery, and he was like, you don't do personality tests for your employees? I was like, no. And he was like, bro, you got to take this personality test. And it's like a $10,000 software personality test. And he sends me it. And he goes, wow, I got to read you your results. And he reads me my results and he says, bro, you fucking hate your job. And I was like, I don't hate my job. Like, I love working in treatment. And he was like, no, bro, the personality test doesn't lie. You fucking hate your job and you're acting like you're managing a hotel, but you're not a hotel manager. You're a builder. You need to go do things. You need to climb mountains. And he was like, you are someone that has so much energy. You got to be doing things, but your company is just kind of staying the same. And he's like, you hate your job. And after that personality test, I was like, I fucking do hate my job. And that's exactly what's going on because my company wasn't growing. You know, we had a lot of debt. We had a lot of loans. The treatment center industry was crazy saturated. It was difficult. So I was like, man, you know, I'm getting older. You know, I was probably 31 at the time. And I was like, it's now or never. Like, if this is my dream, I just have to go do this. And I had planned on selling my portion of the treatment center for not a lot and leaving to go do porn full time. And I think I was 33 years old 2 years ago when I had did that. And before I did it, I talked to my sponsor. I prayed about it. I was also like involved in church. So it's like one of my closest friends is a pastor and I'm like very involved in his church. I was going to church all the time. And I had told him like, hey, look, I'm thinking about doing adult entertainment like full time. And, it was very conflicting for me because I was like, also like, am I leaving my comfort job to go do something crazy? Like, I'm the most successful I've ever been. I'm literally making millions of dollars. I have it all and I still want to go do something else. And I wanted to go to therapy at the time and I had tried like 5-6 different therapists. And my friend was like, try this guy. He's like really, really good. And I was like, all right, whatever. So I end up having a session with this guy and I talked to this guy for 6 hours. And he's a sexologist, world travel. He has a PhD. And I talked to this man for 6 hours my first session. And, at the time I had done all the self-help books, been to a ton of meetings, worked the 12 steps, taking guys to the steps, successful. I had done nonprofit work, involved in church. And here I am contemplating on doing pornography, And I went to go see this guy and he really mapped it out for me. He really changed my life in the sense where he was like, all right, so let me get this straight. You're this special guy and da-da-da-da, and you really enjoy doing porn? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, I'm sure like you kind of feel good because like it's fun and exciting and now you can be creative and you can have fun, you get to meet people and you get to make money and you get to have sex and like you can't do drugs or anything else. So this is like the next best thing. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, and your parents know about it, your family, your siblings know about it, your best friends know about it, your sponsor knows about it. And it's not secretive in that way, but your employees don't know about it. Because that was my thing, is that I don't want to live a double life. And I felt weird lying and not telling the truth to some people. And he was like, it's not a secret, it's just none of their fucking business. And he was like, if you had an employee and you were going to have sex with your wife, you wouldn't say, hey, let me call you back. I'm about to have sex with my wife. That would be weird. So it's not necessarily lying. It's just private. This is your private life. And he was like, you know, my real name is Brian. And he said, you know, Brian, it sounds like you have a guilty pleasure. And I was like, I do. And he goes, and who the fuck doesn't have one of those? And I was like, wow. And he was like, man, you got it all. He was like, you've been clean a long time. You love to help people. And so what? You want to do a little bit of porn and make some money. He's like, these are consenting adults? I said, yeah. And he was like, and you pay every single one of them? I said, yeah. He goes, I don't see a problem with it. And then he was like, you know, he's an older guy, you know? And he was like, people think OnlyFans and porn is crazy. I'm from the 60s. People used to fuck in the street. And, you know, he really opened my eyes. He was like, man, he's like, you know, you have a lot of shame about this. And it's a natural thing. And I think he's like, yeah, I think it's beautiful that this is what you want to do. And I think that industry needs somebody like you. And I was like, wow. And, you know, I had a close friend of mine who, when I told her that I was doing adult entertainment, she said something along the lines of, oh, well, girls who do that don't have any self-respect for themselves. So just know that you're perpetuating that. And I was like, what the, you know, like whatever. And a couple months later, she said, hey, I'm sorry for the way I acted when you told me that. I was really closed-minded. And I think that if anybody could make that industry better, it's you. And I was like, all right, cool, you know. And then I started doing adult entertainment. And that was 2 years ago.
And has your income increased?
Yeah. So it failed in the beginning. Dude, I had all my old videos never made money. So I had 300 videos, but like, dude, they suck. And it's like when you make a video and you put it out and you don't watch it, you can't see what to change. You can't see that it's getting good views or it's not getting good views. And I had done that for a while, and I just would put out these videos and they wouldn't do well. And I realized that I needed to change this, I needed to change that. The angles were horrible. The way that I was filming it, the lighting was bad. The dialogue was not on point. And, you know, I really got better and better. But like in the beginning.
So you were like the cameraman as well as the actor?
Yeah, so I'll be like cameraman. Yeah, and now like I also have videos where I hire a videographer. I have videos where I'm the videographer. I have videos, you know, I've done, I just did my first Brazzers scene, which is like a full production where I'm the talent. So now it's like, you know, I kind of do it all. But in the beginning, I was the videographer and the talent. And a lot of those videos are just poor quality, just badly done. And then it's so competitive now. Man, you have thousands and thousands of people putting out amateur adult content, and a lot of it is better than some of the studios. So it's really competitive now. And when I first came out doing it, I was like, man, what was I thinking? Because I thought this was going to make all this money, and it's really not. And it took a long time. It took like a year. And I had also, also when I started to do adult content, I had like a year off because I had fallen in love with this girl. So my first, which is like a rookie mistake, you know, like whenever I would meet young girls who would come and do videos, I'd be like, whatever you do not get a boyfriend. You know, if you want to take this serious, do not get in a relationship. And like 3 months into my career, I had met this girl and fell like madly in love with her. Like and I totally stopped doing adult entertainment with other people, you know? And I remember one of my clinical directors used to tell me like, you know, one day you're gonna meet someone and you're not gonna wanna be with anyone else. And for like the last 10 years, I've been an open relationship kind of guy. I've dated strippers and OnlyFans girls and girls who are okay with open relationships. And when my clinical director told me that, I remember thinking like I was kind of angry, like, this is who I am. I'm an open relationship type of guy. Because she would say things like, oh, you know, one day you're going to be in a real relationship. And I would be like, dude, I do have real relationships, you know? And I had never thought I wanted monogamy with somebody until I met this girl. And like within days of meeting her, I was like, oh, this is like going to destroy my life right now. Because I had planned to just do adult entertainment, had invested all this money, and now like I don't want any of it, you know? And it was a very up and down relationship. She had just started doing adult entertainment. So I didn't want her to do adult entertainment either. I was getting jealous. And normally, like, I'm not a jealous guy, but like, I didn't see her as like my girlfriend. I saw her as like my wife. I wanted a future with her. And everyone has like their own boundaries. And I just didn't want her to shoot with other people. And I would get controlling, and I would catch her in little lies. And then I would think that she was cheating on me. And I would try to break up with her, and it was kind of like a drug. You know, it was very, very intense. And she was also like very immature for her age. But that relationship ended, and I started to do adult entertainment again.
So it didn't work out?
No, it did not.
Is it difficult to have a monogamous relationship doing porn? I would think it must be.
Well, technically monogamy doesn't...
monogamous because you're...
Well, technically monogamy doesn't mean one person. Technically monogamy means that you have one like life partner. Fidelity means that you're just sexual with one person. So there are people, and I would say half the industry is in a relationship, and I don't think that it makes it harder or easier, you know? I think that when anybody is dedicated to their job, it makes relationships hard. And if you're an adult content creator and you're making money and you're popular and you're getting pulled in a million different directions, relationships are hard, period. Whether you're a doctor, whether you're a nurse, whatever, people who aren't work-driven are easier to be in relationships with because their relationship is their number one. But when you're dating somebody where their business is number one, it's very hard to compete with that, you know? And for me, you know, I see a lot of people in the adult industry who are in relationships long term, and it seems loving, caring, respectful, and they do adult content, and sometimes they shoot with other people, sometimes they only shoot with themselves. But just because you make adult content with other people doesn't mean that there's no boundaries. Every single relationship has boundaries. You know, I have a friend of mine who was in a relationship with this guy, and he didn't care that she did whatever, but his one rule was like, you can't do cream pies, you know? And that was their one rule, you know? And it's like everyone has some type of boundary that is just for them or they don't want. And maybe some people don't have a sexual boundary, you know, but they might have some type of boundary that is just for their partner. But I don't think that it makes it harder. I think love is difficult. You know, I think relationships are difficult in general. You see the most successful people in the world can't hold on to a lasting marriage, you know? So it's like having a lasting relationship is like one of the hardest things you can do. I think it probably is the hardest thing you could do on the planet. You know, it's probably harder than getting clean.
Yeah, a lot of people struggle.
Yeah, you know. And I also think that like just because your relationship lasted 50 years and you didn't break up, that's success. So I don't think that if you were together for 50 years and no one ever got divorced, that's success. And I also don't think that somebody who only dated for a couple years and broke up, that's a failure, because it's worse to be in a relationship for 50 years and not love that person and it be a prison than to date someone, it was amazing and beautiful, and then you realize you were growing apart and then you ended it, you know? So I also think that things don't have to last forever to be beautiful, you know? So it's like a movie is an hour and a half long, and some of them are the greatest things you'll ever see in your whole life, you know?
So what kind of actors, what kind of people are in the porn industry? What kind of people does it attract?
So when I first got into the industry, I would like meet a lot of these guys, and I had seen these guys my whole childhood, you know, like these big macho guys, and you know, they're really rough with the women and stuff like that. And I would meet them in person. A lot of them would be like, kind of like, I would say some of them were like flamboyant. And I don't mean that like in a negative way, but they'd be like a little flamboyant or like feminine or whatever. And I was like, wow, that guy was like really soft-spoken and nice, you know? And I think that in the adult industry, a lot of men have to be kind of softer to work with so many women and make them feel comfortable. You know, I think there's something in what we do where we are good with women, where we can make them feel comfortable, and that's how they have long careers. And then with the women, you would imagine them to kind of, you know, I've met a lot of women in my life, and a lot of the women in the adult industry I would kind of see as like they have a lot of sexual energy, but it's a lot of them, it only comes out on camera. When they would come over, it would be very quiet and nervous. And then as soon as the cameras come on, they would be like these crazy freaks. And for me, it was kind of like people in porn, I would say, are kind of like failed drama geeks, you know, like they're not the hot, most of them aren't the hot girls in high school. Most of them were like the outcasts in high school, and they like acting and they like performing. And then they got into adult entertainment and they just, you know, upgraded their look as the years went on. But a lot of them are, you know, nerdy drama geeks. That's kind of how their personality is. And even myself, like, you know, I was a total outcast in high school and, you know, had no friends and was on drugs. So even myself, I kind of view myself as that.
What was your childhood like?
Man, a nightmare, you know. I didn't realize how horrible my childhood was until I got older and I had friends who had kids. And when you see your friends have kids, you see them do things that you've never experienced. Just simple things, you know. And I grew up in a, you know, decent family, and I grew up in a decent neighborhood. And, you know, my parents did well, and we had like a nice car. We went on like vacation like once a year. But for me, I just never felt like I fit in. And to me, that is the core of addiction. To me, addiction is not necessarily the drugs, but this feeling of unsettling constantly. You just feel like nothing is where it's supposed to be, and just always feeling out of place and not feeling good enough. And, you know, you can have all the friends and it still doesn't feel good. And people can say, I love you, and you don't feel love. And it was like I couldn't connect deeply with people. And even as a young kid, like I didn't know the word, but I thought like I was a sociopath. Like I just couldn't, I would look at my family like they were total strangers sometimes. And, you know, I just felt alienated. And when I found drugs, it was like I had been standing my whole life and I finally sat down. It was like watching a TV in black and white, and I finally smacked it and it went to color. And when I started to do drugs, it was like, now I can connect with people. Now I feel good enough. Now I'm popular. Now I have a feeling of self-worth. Now I feel like everything has come together. And I was never good at sports. You know, my father used to tease me because I struck out in T-ball. You know, my father would say, oh my God, thank God we got it on camera. I mean, for Christ's sake, Brian, the ball is on a tee. And he would make fun of me, and, you know, like I would laugh or whatever, but when I was by myself, I would cry, you know, because I wasn't good at any sport. And growing up, like that's what kids do. They play baseball, they play hockey, they play football. And I was always with the older kids, so I naturally was worse than them. You know, Malcolm Gladwell has a book called Outliers, and he talks about how when a kid is born is like 90% of if they're going to do good in sports, because if you're born in the beginning of the year, you're going to be older than, or beginning of the school year, you're going to be almost a year older than some of the other kids. So a year when you're, you know, 11 years old is a big difference in height and just cognitive ability or whatever. And a lot of the kids born at the end of I'm born in November, a lot of the kids born at the end of the year, they're the runts of the litter, you know? So for me, I always felt like the runt of the litter when it came to sports and stuff like that. And then I would get bullied a lot. I would get made fun of by some of the older kids just because I was weaker and smaller and clumsy and chubby, you know? But I was always funny. I was always funny and charismatic. And then when I started doing drugs, it was like, wow, this is what I was meant to do. I wasn't made to play baseball. I wasn't born to play basketball. And I started to have this revelation, like I'm half Colombian. I'm born to sell this fucking cocaine, you know, and this is what I'm meant to do. And I would read all these books about Colombia and the cartel and Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers. And I would read books like Snowblind about like trafficking cocaine. And I read all the Mario Puzo books. And I was very into film and art and movies. And I watched Paid in Full. And I would watch Scarface and Train Spotting and Pulp Fiction. And I was like, man, this is what God intended me to be. This is who I am. And I became the man. And when I was in 7th grade, I had been arrested. I was the most popular kid in school. I was having sex. I was stealing my mom's car. I was driving. I started to sell powder cocaine. I was selling the end of seventh grade, I was selling cocaine to the kids who were in college. And I acted older. I tried to look older. I had a little gold chain. And by eighth grade, I was going to high school parties. I was going to nightclubs. I had a fake ID. And when I started to get in trouble with the law, my dad really started to lose it. When I was younger, he would kind of laugh it off, but he really started to scream and yell and break things. And that's when it was like, okay, like this isn't cool anymore, And I would get kicked out of the house. My dad sent me to military school. I was getting drug tested all the time. Some of my friends started distancing themselves from me. And one day I was selling coke, and I was 14 years old, and I was in this house, and my friend was like, "You want to sell coke to these guys? It's a crack house." And I was like, "I don't want to go to a crack house." I was going to nightclubs, I'm like, I'm not going to a crack house. And I was like, so like, who says that? Who wants to go to a crack house? And I was like, whatever. And we went to the crack house, and I was infatuated with the people there and what conversations they were having. And I started to sell them coke, and they would cook it and smoke it. And the first time I saw someone smoke crack, I remember thinking like, I would never do that. I don't care what happens. I would never do that. Watching someone smoke crack was like watching someone commit a murder. It was like what? You're ruining your life, And the second time I saw it, I was like, how does that work? And the third time I saw it, I was like, okay. And at the time, I was selling pills. I would sell coke. They would cook it, smoke crack. And then I would sell coke, and they would give me pills. And at the time, Oxycontin was like the thing to do in Florida. Oxy 80s were like $20. Everyone was doctor shopping. And I started to do pills because it would let me not get so paranoid, and I could leave the house. And it was very popular. You could make a lot of money doing it. And people were going to get MRIs and scripts. And I think this one day I got skimped on an 8-ball, and I was coming down, and I was at the crack house, and there was this guy, Richard, who was like a homeless guy. He had no shirt on and no shoes on, barely any teeth. And I was sitting there scraping my bag, and he was smoking, and he looked at me and he said, "You want to hit this?" And I was like, "No, I'm good." And I was like, "You want some of this coke?" And he said, "Is the bear shit in the woods?" I was like, "I don't know, what does that mean?" And then like 10 minutes later, I was coming down. He could see I was coming down. He was like, "You want to hit this?" And I was like, "Does the bear shit in the woods?" And I smoked crack for the first time when I was 14 years old. And from the first time I smoked crack, I knew I would never buy powder cocaine ever again. And I never did. I've never bought coke since then. And man, I just remember smoking crack for the first time and hearing the wah, 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 wah. And like, I remember just like thinking like, I'm gonna struggle with this for the rest of my life. And I did until I got clean. And the pills destroyed me. As bad crack was, I think pills were worse. Being addicted to Oxycontin, you're on a timer. So when you get high, you can set your clock, and you'll know that, in 24 hours, you're gonna start being sick. And in 30 hours, you're gonna start shitting yourself. And in 40 hours, you're gonna start throwing up. And in 60 hours, you're gonna be suicidal. And that was my life for 3 years, was trying not to be dope sick, robbing houses, breaking into cars, pawning everything I could, getting little petty charges, promising to my parents I would never use again. And I remember this one time I had taken like $120 from my dad from his debit card. And my dad had a job interview that day. And this is like 2007 during like the housing crisis. And my dad was losing everything. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting in front of the TV all day, depressed, and the worst, every day telling us they're gonna take the house. We might not have a place to live. And I remember I took his last $120, and my dad had a job interview that day. And when he went to go put gas in the car, he didn't have money for gas. And he came back and he was like, "I can't even go to a fucking job interview to try to catch up on the mortgage because you took my last fucking $120. And I remember I broke down crying, and I told him that I was doing drugs and that I have some still. And I remember he was like, you still have some? And I was like, yeah. And I had like 3 pills left. And I remember I brought him the pills, and we flushed them down the toilet together. And I remember like, I was probably like 15 at the time. I remember I started crying, and he hugged me, and he was like, man, you really need to change your life. And I was like, I know. And my father got a piece of paper, and he wrote, like, I still have it. He wrote, Brian will never use drugs again. He'll do good in school. And he wrote like all these things. And he was like, now what do you want from me? And I was like, I want you to stop yelling at me. I want you to stop calling me a loser. You know, I want to have like a real relationship with you. And my father wrote it down. And then he pulled out a box cutter. And he was like, I was like, what the fuck? He's like, we're going to do a blood oath. And my dad cut his finger, and he cut my finger, and I signed it, and he signed it, we put blood on it. And then my dad gave me a $100 bill, and he gave me the keys to his car. And he said, now I want you to go and just do something good. Go get a haircut, go to the mall with your friends, but just go. Like, my dad's whole thing was like, go be a kid, you know? And as soon as that $100 touched my hand, I knew I was getting high.
Oh, no.
As soon as the money touched my hand, I was like, I'm getting high. And as soon as I got the keys to his car, I went and got pills and crack. And I came home like 8 hours later. And my dad knew I was high just from looking at me. And he stapled a piece of paper to his copy of the paper. And he wrote, "Your Honor, where is it?" And he slid it under my door. And me and my dad stopped talking. We didn't talk for years. And there was times where my mom would make dinner, and he would be like, he doesn't eat at the dinner table with us, you know? And my dad didn't know how to deal with addiction. To my dad, it was like, dude, I was working when I was 14. Like, you have everything, and you're fucking wasting it doing a fucking drug that lasts 5 minutes, you know? And I lived my life just thinking that I was just gonna be on methadone. You know, I remember just praying to God that, like, you know, when I turn 18, at least I'll be able to get on methadone. And that's what people talk about in the crack house. I remember this lady would tell me, like, oh, it's cool, you know, when you get older, you could get a methadone script, then you sell, you know, your Ativan, and then you could sell some Xanax, and you could smoke crack, and then you get a script for this, and that's basically how you can manage. And I ended up getting kicked out of school multiple times, and then I went to a treatment center for 6 months, and it was a 3-month treatment center. And I was there for 6 months just because I was so rebellious and probably so severe. I remember this lady telling me that in all of her years working for the Broward County School District, she's never seen a more severe case of drug addiction in an adolescent. And the thing is that when my case would come up to like the school board and like the probation officer, their biggest concern were like, where the fuck are the parents? And then they would meet my parents, and my parents would be like the nicest people you could, you know. My dad was a little hard ass, but my dad was a good guy. You know, my dad cared about me. You know, my dad worked, and my dad was there. You know, my dad said he loved me. Like, my dad took me on fishing trips. You know, they might have ended with him yelling at me, but like, you know, I couldn't really blame my parents. But when you're underage, that's kind of their concern, is like there's something going on with the parents. And I remember this lady said that she found a scholarship for me to a treatment center. And I was like, I don't want to go. And she was like, we're not asking you. Like, we're telling you, you failed your last outpatient program. You have to go. And what really changed my life was in treatment, when I went to detox, one of my childhood friends was like, for years, hey, man, you should read this book. And I was like, I'm on drugs, bro. I'm not really reading a lot now. And he kept telling me to read this book. And when I was in detox, I asked my mom, and I was like, hey, Mom, can you get me this book Jimmy's been wanting me to read? And she was like, sure. And she brought it to me. And it was Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis. And that book, expanded my mind to horizons that I didn't know existed. And he talked about 12-step meetings and he talked about how he could never stay clean for years. And at the end of the book, he says, I went to all these fancy rehabs. I spent all this money going to rehab, and I've done all these things, and I could never stop using. And I was a rock star, and I had all the resources and all the therapists and all the sober coaches. And I'm sober today because I went to a free AA meeting and got a commitment to pick up the chairs. And I remember closing that book and being like, I got to go to these meetings. And I remember I left there and I went to a meeting, and my mom took me. And I remember my mom being like, Brian, these people are not clean. She was like, these people, it was at 10 o'clock at night. It was like people with mohawks and tattoos and smoking cigarettes and rap music. And my mom was like, Brian, you need to go to a place for kids. This is a place for adults. And I was like, no, this is where I need to go. And I remember going to meetings, and it took a while, but after a couple months, I remember being like, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. Like, this is where I need to be. This is this is gonna work, because it's so crazy. Like, it really is killing a fly with a hammer. When you go to meetings and you have a sponsor and you do the steps and you're reading the Just for Today in the morning and you're talking to other addicts and your whole life consists of recovery, it's almost impossible to use. You're not gonna use. And then there's so much support and the camaraderie, it's just like, it's a no-brainer. Like, to me, it just made sense. And I remember going home and telling my dad, like, I don't want to go to college because my home group is here, and I'm really thinking about going to these meetings, and I think this is what I need to do in my life. And my dad looked at me more disappointed than when I was smoking crack. My dad was like, how are you going to be a winner if you keep hanging out with these fucking losers? And my father was totally against 12-step meetings. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to hear about it. To him, he was like, go to college and fucking make money. And my father didn't really think I was clean my first year clean. My first year clean, my father laughed at my little recovery coins, my chips. I remember this one time he let me borrow his car, and I put like my 60-day key tag on it. And when I gave him back his keys, he grabbed the keys like he was gonna get Hep C from it. He was like, why the fuck is this on my keys? And I thought he would be like, oh, I'm proud of you. What's this? You have 60 days? And my dad was like, God forbid people think I go to that shit. And it was difficult because, as a kid, you just want your father's approval. And I'm finally clean. And it's still like not good enough for him,
Are you still going to recovery today?
Yeah. I just spoke at a meeting last night. I have a sponsor. I go to meetings all the time, So I'm still hyper involved.
And if you weren't so involved, would
I relapse?
Yeah. I guess that's what I'm asking.
For me, I believe that as soon as you think you don't need meetings, the relapse has already started. So as soon as you think that you don't need to go, you're already, whatever. As soon as you think it could never happen to you, it's already started to happen. One, I believe that I'm an addict, and I believe I'm my healthiest when I'm going to meetings. Two, I believe that I owe such a debt to the 12-step program that even if God himself came down and was like, hey, you've been absolved of your addiction, I'd be like, that's cool, but I still got to pay it back at these meetings. So for me, it's both. I feel like I get to go to meetings. There's a lot of people in prison who can't go. There's a lot of people who have died that can't go. I know for me, it keeps me as sharp as I can be. When I'm going to meetings, I'm not in a victim mentality. A lot of people think that when you go to meetings, it's like victim mentality. It's the opposite. You go to meetings and people tell you, hey, it's time to take accountability for your bullshit. You go to meetings, people aren't co-signing your shit. People are like, okay, you had a fucked up life. That's cool. Don't ever use. There's no excuse to use, So for me, I believe that meetings are as much as, food and water,
What is your view on pornography in general? I know you're deep in it.
Yeah.
And you're making money,
For me, it's adult.
In terms of its impact in society and relationships.
So to me, it's adult entertainment, and I really do see it as people who do like a martial art professionally. So it's like for me, if somebody was to go start a street fight outside, they would go to jail. But if two people were like, hey, Monday at 5 o'clock, we're gonna fight and film it, and these are the rules, and they fought, you'd be like, these people are athletes.
No, I get that, but as a societal
How, like, is it bad for society?
Yeah, that's basically what
I would see it as ice cream. So to me, it's like, I'm making ice cream every day, but I don't think you should be eating ice cream every day. And, I personally can count on my hands how many times I've watched pornography.
I think porn is probably a little more addictive than ice cream, though.
I mean, I would probably say more people die from sugar and overeating than pornography.
Yeah, maybe they're dying from, yeah.
So it's like, what's really more deadly and what's really more harmful? It's really up to the individual. An individual can ruin their life gambling. Now you have gambling on your phone 24/7. I think that's the next epidemic.
Yeah.
You got 16-year-old kids watching gambling streams, So I think gambling is like another epidemic. And like, you also have girls that are 16 years old waiting to turn 18 to do OnlyFans because there's so much money in it. And I think that there is something that I don't think it's healthy for everybody, just like I don't think working on Wall Street is healthy for anybody. I think Wall Street has probably produced horrific experiences for trauma and loss and all types of things. And then there's all like this stigma about like all the abuse that goes on in the adult industry. Dude, hospitals have crazy abuse. Police officers, insane amount of suicide, PTSD and all kinds of things. So a lot of times people stigmatize the adult industry to be bad for creators or whatever. But when you look at it long term, I think the number one mental health profession is veterinarians. So it's like no one ever becomes a veterinarian and someone's like, you should really think about that, But on a statistic standpoint, it's like there's a lot of other professions that are way more harmful to the individual than the adult entertainment industry. But I do think that as it gets more common for people to do adult entertainment at a younger age, that's the issue, where there's so many young people who haven't really developed their character and their boundaries and things like that, where it's becoming more attractive to do, as it goes on. And for me, I try to tell people, go see a therapist, talk to people about it, really think about this. This is on the internet forever. And I would say a lot of women who do adult entertainment do end up regretting it and only do it for a couple months. It's not for everybody. It's not as glamorous as people think. Girls think that they're going to do OF and become millionaires overnight. Most people don't. But it's no different than like, rappers. Most rappers don't succeed. Most rap is talking about murder and all types of heinous things, but people understand that that's entertainment, or I would hope that they would understand that that's entertainment. And for me, I think that you can't stop it. And you can't, it's really hard to throttle once it's already out there. So it's very hard to throttle people getting into the adult industry. And when you do throttle it, you push it underground. And when things are underground, they're not regulated.
Right.
So for me, it's better to have more awareness on adult entertainment education. Everyone's getting tested. Like nowadays, there's a lot of compliance that goes into it. And even though OF is becoming more and more popular with the younger generation, this has empowered women more than it ever has. In our entire life on earth, it has never been easier for a woman to be financially independent ever than with OnlyFans.
As a 20-year-old girl can make $1 million easily.
A month. So it's like so now men are like, this is bad, but it's like, hey, now it's like, you have women who don't need men. And I don't know if that's good for society or bad, but it is a phenomenon that has never happened on earth. Women have never been so financially well off. I think they just put out an article that OF has made more money per employee than Apple, which is kind of insane to think about. But at the same time, it's like, who's buying all this content? Men. So it's like, you can't really blame women for supplying a demand, The demand was there, and now there's an avenue with the internet to kind of match that. And I think as years go on, it will get more and more watered down, and there'll be like new platforms and things like that. But it's very similar to back in the day when rappers and entertainers needed a publicist and they needed a manager and they needed the record company. And now it's like, hey, you could go straight to YouTube and you don't need anybody, and you can be your own label and you can make your own thing. So now the same thing that happened with music when Napster came out, You know, when Napster came out, you didn't need a record company, you know, but now when OnlyFans come out, like you don't need a manager, you don't need all these different people taking, you know, all the money, and now they're in charge of their own business, you know?
Yeah, it's a very interesting world we're living in now. I think my problem with pornography is maybe it's more technology is the problem, because a mature adult who wants to watch this stuff
Yeah.
in the privacy of his own home can probably do that and not destroy his life. But what I see are a lot of very young, especially males probably, watching it and never developing any of the social skills.
Yeah, and even myself, you know, I the first time I ever saw it was on a magazine, and the first time I ever seen adult entertainment was in a magazine. I was probably in like 3rd grade, and my friend's cousin had it under his bed, you know. So even back then, it's like, you know, people had access to magazines and you could watch it on the internet, but now it's on kids' phones, and it's very hard to restrict age and all these things. And it's kind of like, it's very hard to change, because it's like, we could say that with food. There was a time where if you wanted ice cream, too bad. You know, now it's like, man, if you want ice cream, you can get it at 2 a.m. from 5 different places any time you want. So it's like, adult entertainment is just doing what all these other things are doing. You can gamble on your phone right now. You can go bet on the stock market right now. You can go watch a video right now. You can go watch this right now on your phone. So it's like, that's just one thing in society that is catching up to everything else. And is it good or bad? I don't know, but I just know that it's going to take more human discipline to say no to it now. Just like it was when magazines came out. You know, when magazines came out, I'm sure people were like, well, now everyone gets to see people naked. You know, I'm sure there was people who were like, well, now there's television. What's next? You know? So it's like, you know, every generation kind of has an issue with the newer technology because it's making it more accessible. But I'm sure, you know, when someone who was in their 60s was a kid and their grandma was saying, well, this is ridiculous, there shouldn't be naked ladies in picture magazines.
Is your attitude it's just sex and we're all too uptight about it?
I don't know if we're all too uptight about it, but I know I don't expect people to have my same views. I understand that my views are a little more liberal when it comes to sexuality. And I think that a lot of people have old school traditions. And I would never make fun of somebody or downplay them because they have old traditional values. I do think that there's something very special about a man and a woman having low body counts and getting married and having kids and having a normal, regular life, quote unquote. I think there's something special about romance. And I don't think that pornography dilutes that for me. Like, I don't think that it does. And I think that there are traditional values that are still alive and well with people who do pornography. You know, there's a lot of us in the industry that are, you know, maybe not as traditional as some people, but still have traditional values and still value relationships and still value, you know, monogamy and stuff like that, you know. And for us, it's more about communication and being open and honest, you know. And there are a lot to say about people who have old school traditional values, and those values have been created by men to imprison women. You know, a lot of those things, like people are like, oh, well, back in the day, people never got divorced. Okay, well, people also beat their wives and no one said anything about it. Mm-hmm. People also cheated on their wives left and right, and the woman couldn't leave because when you got divorced, you were considered, you know, damaged goods. So it's like, you know, I don't know if my view is better than somebody else's, but I'll say that I respect other people's views. And I would understand why somebody is like, hey, this is not good. And I would understand why someone will say, this is too much to the left, you know? And for me, it's like, well, this is intended for adults. And just like someone who sells firearms, like I'm doing the best I can to not, you know, make this glamorous to kids. You know, I'm not interacting with kids. I'm not trying to put this in schools, you know, and, you know, that's just kind of my view on it.
What are the best things about this career for you?
For me, you know, when I went to therapy, I was having really issues with like my identity, you know, like I would wear a suit and tie every day, and, you know, my social media was like, you know, pretty boring, and, you know, I was just like going to work, and it was fun, you know. And my therapist was like, I don't think you're a businessman. And in my mind, I'm like, what? Like I have a thriving business. And he was like, no, I think you're an artist. And I had never really considered myself an artist because I can't draw, But he was like, no, I really do think you're an artist. And he was like, I think that you really, really like creating things. And I think when you're not creating things, you feel lost. And I think that you need to always be challenged and do new things.
So you're a filmmaker as well.
Yeah, now I'm a filmmaker.
Is that where your creativity comes in, or?
Yeah, I love film. I love, my favorite movie is Buffalo 66. My second favorite movie is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I love film, and I love foreign film. And when I watch something, I'm just like, I look at all the little details, and I've been obsessed with film my whole life, So for me, this is kind of where film and adult entertainment like come together. And then the business side of it, to me, it's magic. So for me, this is all three things that I really enjoy, I read a book by Tim Kennedy, and he's like a Navy SEAL veteran and UFC fighter. And he said, he used to really like fighting people. And he used to like fight random people all the time, And he was like, man, I really liked fighting people. But the first time I got paid to fight somebody, lightning struck. And that's kind of how it was for me, where it's like I really enjoyed sex, but when I realized that I could make money from it, it was like a validating thing where it's like, wow, it's cool to make art, but when someone buys your art for the first time, it does feel good. It does feel like, wow, like I'm good enough where someone would be like, I want to pay for that. And I'm sure even like with what you do, like to me, you do more explicit content than I do. If I got 1,000 girls in here and I said, all right, who wants to be naked in front of the camera, or who wants to talk about the most horrific trauma they've ever been through, I would say that that's probably more explicit than what I do,
More personal, for sure.
More personal. And even, more personal, more in depth, more soft white underbelly, that might be way more soft white underbelly, because some women are like, oh, I would never want to be totally naked because you could see every imperfection and everything. But what you do, you're really getting people's their rawest story that they probably thought they would die with these secrets, So to me, it's like we're in the same industry.
Funny. What would you say is the worst part of what you do?
I would probably say the worst part is when people think that it's all good. I would probably say the worst part is like, man, I'm on set for like 8 hours. I'm not really into the talent. I could tell she's not into me. She's FaceTiming her boyfriend in the car. Yeah. She's not even like looking at me. And like, there's not a lot of chemistry.
It's not as glamorous as it.
Yeah, it's not as glamorous as you think. There might be some smells going on that aren't pleasant. There might be, people who are really hungry, just waiting for you to, finish so they can get their food. And, it's hot out, and like, they got to turn the AC off because the AC messes up the camera.
Is it just not romantic at all?
And it's not romantic, and it's very fake, and the girl's moaning, and it doesn't feel good, she's like just dying to go home. And, I wanted to do more mainstream because it's hard. You could get all these guys who say, oh, I wish I could live the life that you live, or I wish I did what you did. But like, if you got 1,000 guys and you lined them up and said, hey, this is what you have to do today. It's going to be an 8-hour day. You're going to have to stay, erect for 5 of those hours on and off, and you're going to have to perform, and there's going to be a bunch of lights and cameras. Most people would walk away, or most men can't do it.
Are there drugs you're taking to maintain?
Every once in a while I'll take like a pill to help me out, but in the adult industry, there's a lot of guys who use Trimex, which like they inject a drug into their, penis, whatever, to stay, erect, I don't really want to do that just because I'm scared of like being dependent on that, but like every once in a while I'll take like half a Viagra or something like that, but usually I've gotten comfortable because the biggest thing is that it's all in your head. When you go get like ED medicine, one of the questions they ask you is like, well, do you have trouble getting it up by yourself? And if you don't, that means you don't have ED. You know what I mean? Or if like if you could do it by yourself, that means that it's a mental thing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times for me, it's like I've learned that, hey, if you need 5 minutes, we're gonna give you 5 minutes. But at the same time, I also know that if it takes 15 minutes, you might not never be called again. you know? So there's that pressure, but I also understand that like, hey, like people expect you to be able to take a couple minutes if you need a couple minutes.
How long do you think you'll be doing this? How old are you now?
I'm 35.
35. Still young.
I mean, sometimes I look up the age of some of the top guys. Some of the top guys in the industry are 45, you know? So it's like there are guys who their peak is at 45,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, you're not going to get aged out.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, it would really depend on if I meet somebody that I want to just be with, you know? But I don't know. I've always been into filming sex, even when it wasn't posted online. I've always been like I think I was like in middle school, and it was like the second time I've ever had sex before. And I remember my first thought was, oh my God, I need to grab the family video camera and record this. And I set it up in the corner and I recorded it. And I went to go watch it. And I didn't realize you couldn't see anything because the lights were off, you know? But like since the beginning, I've always had this thing with recording, you know? And I just think that it's no different than someone who likes photography and likes, you know, like skating is the same thing. Like very few sports film goes in hand, but like in the skating industry, skate videos are just as important as the actual skating. You know, they do a trailer, they put music to it. When I was a kid, I would watch skate videos all day long, and it's like, to me, adult content is kind of like that, where it's like, okay, doing it on your own is cool, but you kind of want to get this on camera, you know? And it's also not easy to be able to get the certain angles that you need to get and the way you got to hold the camera. So I've been able to get good at it.
Oh, you could get out of the industry and still be a filmmaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could stop being an actor and be a filmmaker.
Yeah. And I have friends who do it all. You know, there's this guy, Seth Gamble, who he's talent. He's a director. He does it all. My friend Grimy, you know, he does it all. And dude, this kid's 25 and he kills it. And his artistic way to make he's like a real artist, and he's a performer, and he's in a relationship with one of the like top girls in the industry. So for me, it's like, you know, there are people who do it all, and people take breaks all the time. It's like normal in the industry for people to be like, oh, I'm not shooting for the next 6 months, because people don't realize that you might see all these videos. Those videos were shot a year ago, you know?
Do you think the industry is harder on women than it is men?
And maybe it's different. So for men, there's not a lot of men in the industry. There's a shortage of men all the time. So for men, one, it's hard to perform, and two, they get canceled so fast. So to be a man in the industry, you need to have a really high EQ.
Get canceled for what?
Oh, saying something racist, abuse, beating up a girl, doing drugs, you know, posting your hardcore political beliefs online, you know, just like, you know, you're in an industry where it's like, it's dominated by women and they don't need you. The women don't need you. There's plenty of guys who they can work with. And the thing is that for the adult content, people want to see a different array of girls all the time, but they don't care if it's the same guy every time, you know? There's like the same 10 guys who are in the industry who shoot every single girl and it works. So there's not a need. And if you're in the industry as a male, you need to understand that you are the confetti to the party. You know, you're not the main thing. And a lot of men have really big egos and they think that they should be, and they try to control these women, and they try to, I don't know what, but it takes a certain individual to really be able to work with that many women, you know? Imagine working with women in the most intimate way every single day, and you got to make sure you don't piss anyone off, you know? And a lot of times as a male, it just takes a certain individual to have an actual career, you know? You got to be professional, and a lot of men can't do that. A lot of men fail in that area. But I would think that it's harder for men as a performer. You know, I saw this video once where this guy was saying that women don't decide if sex happens, men do. And I was like, what? And he said, because if a guy can't get it up, no sex is happening, you know? And it's true. It's like, dude, if the guy can't perform, nothing is going on. The woman could be having the worst day ever, not into it, not even remotely turned on, and the show goes on, you know? So for a man, there's a lot of pressure to perform. And if if porn depended on women to orgasm, there wouldn't be much, you know? So it's like I know women who do this every single day and they can count on their hands how many times they've had real orgasms on set, you know? And some girls are the opposite. Some girls are so into it that they're...
Yeah, it's a very different situation for women than it is for men.
For sure, but women also deal with the scrutiny of their bodies getting, you know, the comments are like, that's why I say it's like, man, you got to go to therapy and you got to have a strong sense of self, and you can't let things get under your skin, because you can really let these comments and fans get to your head. You have people that are stalkers, and you have people describing in a hateful way every intimate thing about you, trying to get under your skin just to get a reaction. And that's very difficult, but I would say it's difficult for both of us, you know. It's difficult for dating. You know, I think it's harder for women to date. You know, I think it's harder for men to look past a woman who has a significant high body count that is also on camera. A lot of men's and it's because we have big egos. A lot of men's ego can't deal with that, and they feel less than because so many people have been with this woman. They don't want to feel like they're getting what's left, as opposed to getting somebody who's more desired, that hasn't been, you know, passed around, for lack of better words. And for men, I think a lot of women feel good about, well, this guy could have slept with 10,000 girls all day long and he chose to give that up to be with me, so I must be a real prize. Whereas for a man, he feels the other way around. Well, no one wanted her seriously and they all treated her like a one-night stand, and now I'm the one who's treating her like a princess. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's kind of how society would view a lot of that.
And Teddy, let me ask you one last question. What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in all of this?
So I really base everything on like being clean, and I have such a high respect for recovery and the 12 steps and like the 12-step program. And I really do think that anything I do is geared towards to helping addicts and getting a message across that anyone can get clean. And for me, my biggest lesson that I've learned was that it's better to, because my biggest thing when I got clean was I can't stop thinking about using. Every day I just kept thinking about getting high. Every day I keep thinking about using, and dreaming about using. And I could taste it, you know, and it was driving me insane every day, just thinking like if I just used, this mental torment would go away. And that same guy who called me from Asheville, actually, I was telling him my dilemma, and he said, man, it's better to be clean, dreaming about using, than to be using, dreaming about being clean. And I was like, wow, because I remember being dope sick, and I would be dreaming about the people who go and get coffee in the morning. And I remember being on crack, and I remember being arrested, and I would just look out the window and dream about what it would be like to just be a regular guy, just to wake up and have a job.
Is sex or porn like in some way a replacement for the drug?
People ask me that all the time. And to me, no, you know, to me, if you're an addict, you're going to have an obsession and compulsion all the time. So you're going to obsess about things. Now, what recovery does, that installs a pause button where you don't let it override your housing, your finances, your commitments, and your relationship with God. So for me, adult entertainment, sex could become so important that if I say, hey, I'm going to go to your wedding, I don't go to your wedding because I'm too busy doing this. If I say, hey, I'm going to pay the rent, I don't pay the rent because I'm spending it on this. You know, if I say, hey, I'm going to go and pray and have a spiritual connection, I stop doing that stuff, or I stop giving back or whatever because I'm too busy doing this. For me, recovery allows me to say, hey, this is really important, but my recovery is more important. And I'm going to have an ability to say, hey, I can't do this on this day because I have a prior commitment. Hey, I can't do this because I need to spend time with my family. So for me, it's not an addiction. It's not an addiction. It's something I'm passionate about, and it's something that I've turned into a career, and it's something that I enjoy. People throw the word addiction around a lot. Oh, well, aren't you just a sex addict now? Well, no, because I'm not breaking into a car to go steal it to go to the massage parlor, you know? So people use the word addiction very freely, but to me, an addiction is when you're waking up every day saying, I'm never gonna do this again, and then by 10 o'clock in the morning, you're doing it again. To me, an addiction is something where your family is like, please stop, you're hurting us. And you're telling them, I'm gonna stop. And you could pass a lie detector test. And later that night, you're doing it and hurting them. And they're saying, what the fuck is wrong with you? And you're saying, I don't know. To me, that's an addiction. An addiction is when you're saying you never want to do it and you're still doing it. When you're going against your own, word. So for me, I'm not going against my word. I don't have a wife at home that I'm lying to and I'm doing this. I don't have people in my life that I'm promising I'm never going to do this again. I'm doing it again. I'm not putting myself in financial ruin. If anything, this is helping me financially, and I've made a way to make money to do what I do, So for me, it's nowhere near an addiction.
Is there a stigma to being a porn actor?
Yeah, of course.
What kind of things do you encounter?
I would probably say that people think that I'm like a crazed sex addict. I say more than I say yes. So there's a lot of people that think that, just because I'm in the adult industry, I'll sleep with anybody or whatever. And a lot of women in the adult industry are like that too. I know girls in the industry who haven't slept with a non-professional actor in years. I know girls who have no interest. You couldn't sleep with them for $1 million. I know girls that do porn for $1,500 per video. And if you gave them $1 million, they would say no. So I think to me, it's that people think that because I'm an adult entertainer that I have no boundaries, I lack discipline, have STDs, whatever, But honestly, people in the adult industry are probably the cleanest people, when it comes to STDs because they're getting tested all the time. You can't even go do a scene without having a test that's 14 days or newer. And it's getting full panel tested, not like what most people get. Most people only get a 6-panel test, But I would think that some of the biggest stigmas is just that we are unspiritual people.
Depraved.
I know a lot of women in the program, or I know a lot of people in the industry who are very, very well connected with God and believe in God and are good people and don't lie and cheat, where you can have a woman who bartends, who is lying to her boyfriend, doing things behind her people's backs, stealing, whatever. There's a lot of other industries where there are real victims in the things that they do. And if you're a mechanic, dude, there are people lying to an old lady right now that she needs, brakes.
Right.
To me, it's this is an industry where my product is what I'm selling. There's no bait and switch here. I'm not convincing, and I'm also not someone who convinces people to get in the industry. I know there's a department in the industry where people recruit. I'm not someone who will ever recruit someone to do this. I have women who meet me all the time who are like, how would I get in? And I tell them, you probably don't want to. You just want to right now because maybe you're going through something, but in the long run, this probably isn't for you. And I don't want you to learn the hard way. And I'm not into getting people in the industry. That's just not me, If people are in the industry, and so be it,
Very interesting talk.
Hey, thank you.
All right, Teddy Tarantino, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Thanks for having me.
Fascinating life you've got carved out for yourself.
When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.